And with Otto just telling him like, you know what? Maybe this was a mistake. Maybe all of us like trying, like usurping the throne was a mistake because you're dumb. I know a lot of people are saying that it's not Aemon's fault for Blood and Cheese, but it 100% is. Dun, 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 dun. That's the only way I know how to like start this off. Hello everyone, my name's Anastasia Gracia and House of the Dragon Season 2 Episode 1. Highly awaited. Can't believe it's been 2 years. I don't know, maybe it's because I'm stuck in the like rot of all of the discourse that it only feels like one because the conversation really never ends. But here we are. So House of the Dragon, if everyone doesn't know, I feel like there's no way you can be unfamiliar with this. It's like one of the most popular shows right now. It's a prequel series to Game of Thrones. House of the Dragon depicts a civil war in Westeros between the Blacks headed by Rhaenyra and the Greens headed by Alicent. Takes place like over 100 years before Game of Thrones. It's based off of the short story entitled The Princess of the Queen, which turned into then a book, Fire and Blood. So Fire and Blood is not an accurate source. Fire and Blood is basically someone interviewing multiple people to get what happened. But some of these people were not there when these events occurred, and they are obviously biased sources. So many of the main players don't even give their own version of it because they've died years before Fire and Blood even happened. So that's one thing. It's a conflict between the Blacks headed by Rhaenyra and then the Greens headed by Alicent. And I choose to depict it this way because the story to me is centered on the relationship of these two women. And they go from childhood friends to foes on the opposite sides. Now, I know a lot of people are like, why is it not Aegon? But it's like, it's not really Aegon. It's the relationship between Rhaenyra and Alicent is more integral to the story. That, and I'm also like a Rhaenyscent, so I will always see things in their point of view. And I think that the story that the showrunners are trying to tell differs from the book for various reasons, because the show not only is trying to show what the truth actually happened in the Dance of the Dragons, but also a commentary of like how history is told and why we tell those things. Like it's almost like historiography in a way, except this is all fake and dragons don't exist and none of this happened and Westeros isn't a real place. But anyways, I have my notes. Let's begin. So I'm thinking with this, it's so much easier to not go chronologically as the episode happened, but to go, I'll just do Alicent and Rhaenyra, everyone else, and the major things that happen and what I expect also to happen. So the episode begins with like this voiceover, and at first I was like, who is this? Is this like in third person omniscient? Like, who is this? It turns out to be Cragen Start talking to Jace, bringing him up to the wall and explaining like, this wall is there for a reason, and there's things that we are guarding at the wall that are a little bit more important than the Civil War, but like, I'll give you a couple hundred men to fight. And there, Jace receives the news that Lucerys dies. So this entire episode is crafted in the days, if not weeks, it's kind of unsure of the timeline of that. Like, even though the aftermath is also on Aegon's usurpation, or just that the Greens putting him in place in the beginnings of this like civil war, I think that Lucerys' death is more important in not only Rhaenyra's characterization in the Blacks because he is a family member, but then it also you see how it impacts the Greens and how they react to death and the differences in that reaction, mainly on Alicent, and I'll get into that. I think it's just better just to, while we're talking about Alicent, just to start with her characterization. I did not expect Alicent in Sir Criston's first scene to be her turning him into a munch. Funny. I don't know. It was just very startling because we do not see adult Alicent be sexual at all. And when we see Alicent as a whole, like both her younger versions and older versions, her in sex is usually very negative. Like the scene with Viserys was so sad. And then with Larys and his foot thing, weird and kind of seems coerced. So to see this, it was very interesting. We left off with Alicent and her misinterpretation of what Viserys was saying about the prince that was promised, and her interpreting it as being their son Aegon, and him saying that he wants Aegon to be king. And then she goes to the small council, or they call it the Green Council, and tells them that like, oh, he wanted Aegon to be king, he told me that. A lot of people blame her for that, but I do blame Viserys for that, and I can make a whole separate video why he's like the actual villain of this. When it comes to that, a lot of thing that people miss is that they admitted that they were planning to install Aegon as king regardless of what Viserys said to Alicent. it's kind of, I feel like it's almost implied that they don't even believe that she said that he said that to her, that she's just saying that to make herself feel better. They were planning to do that anyway. And she's like, wait, you guys were planning to do this? Also revealing the lack of power that she had even as queen, but we'll get into that later in the whole power situation with Alicent. One thing that's also neglected, I feel like, is the fact that Alicent is the one person on the Green Council trying to go about this as peacefully as a usurpation can, meaning she doesn't want Rhaenyra and her children to all die, when everyone else is like, that is a very clear solution. They all need to die. Like, and on both sides of the Blacks and the Greens, there are figures who are just like, we just need to kill everybody. Kill the whole line. Like, it's totally fine. Like, we should have just killed everyone in the line. So it's interesting that she and Rhaenyra both mirror each other in the ways that they don't want to kill everybody. They're trying to go about this in a more logical way. Not logical, but in a way that's not as cruel. So moving on into this season and seeing the reaction to that scene and people like, oh my God, where's duty? Where's sacrifice now? Okay. When it comes to Alicent, people forget or did not realize that her experiences with Kristen are the only consensual experiences that she's ever had in her life. And this is a woman who's like 30 years old, 30 something years old with 4 children. And this experience, now that her husband's dead, is the first one that is she wants, she's initiating, she is enjoying. To put it bluntly, because a lot of people don't want to accept this, Alicent Hightower is a victim of grooming, being offered up for sexual exploitation by her father, being a child bride, experiencing marital rape, being forced to be a teenage mother with a husband who's middle-aged, if not older, a husband who had leprosy. That's why Viserys was like losing limbs and his parts of his face were rotting. He had leprosy that he chose to not treat. So he has a disease that causes limb loss that can be treated, that he's refusing treatment for, that is also contagious. He continues to rape Alicent and to force Alicent into the marital bed where he could potentially give it to her while she's pregnant, while she's whatever, while she's young. No concern for that. And she's also married to a man who willingly killed his first wife. We do not like have this bluntness when it comes to King Viserys. He murdered Emma when he came to the option of having a son versus keeping his wife alive after his wife, who was also like 13 years old when he got with her, and he had forced her through several, pregnancies, where 5 pregnancies, and Rhaenyra was the only one that lived, not including the last one that killed her. Like that first scene in the first episode where they hold her down and cut her open without any medication or any sedation, insanity. So Alicent is with a man who she knows does not honor her life in any single way. All of this is portrayed to her as, this is something you should do because you are a woman. This is something you should do because you are a wife. This is something that you have to endure and be victimized as, to be a good wife, to be a good queen, because there are so many things more important to you than you and your safety and your body and your autonomy. She is trapped in a system that tells her that her trappings are a good thing. So when it comes to younger Queen Alicent, I forget what episode it was, but when Daemon takes Rhaenyra to the brothel and tries to embarrass her, and everyone thinks that she had sex with Daemon and sullied herself, but in reality she had sex with Kristen Cole, but nobody knew that. Alicent is questioning her, and she's like, if you had been sullied, and we know that you Targaryens have queer customs, and like people being so upset at Alicent for that. But a lot of y'all are not realizing that Rhaenyra had the choice to go on an entire campaign to find a husband of her own choosing, to have a love match, which is an extreme privilege that no other woman really of the time gets. That's the other thing, is that Alicent does not have inherent power in the way that Rhaenyra does. Yes, Alicent is rich. She's born into the upper class. Her father is the hand of the king. She's not a princess. She's not in the royal family. So she doesn't have this like inherent privilege or protection that Rhaenyra does. Rhaenyra's father is the king. And while he's a shitty dad, she was still protected when it came to that whole situation with Daemon. He covered that up. He gave her that green tea. He kicked Daemon out. Not really though. So those are the differences. So for Rhaenyra to go on that campaign and treat it so irresponsibly. And I understand that she didn't want to get married. And it definitely is a problem, the fact that Viserys was trying to push marriage onto her as like a solution to her grieving, because to him, getting married fixed all his problems, because again, he's dehumanizing Alicent. But her neglecting that and then doing something that would potentially ruin all of that is such a stab to Alicent, because I think in the episode before, she was talking about how much work it was to put into that and how romantic she thinks it is of finding someone and loving someone. It is resentment, it is jealousy, it is anger, because who wouldn't be? And then when they're adults and they have children and Alicent sees that, obviously Rhaenyra's first 3 kids are not fathered by Laenor Velaryon. It sucks that he's gay. He was forced into this relationship. It sucks that they had to have sex with each other. It sucks that they're put in that position. But from Alicent's point of view, seeing someone who is in somewhat of a similar situation to her, forced into a marriage she doesn't really want to be with, to affront that responsibility and to be so rebellious of that, to have children that are very obviously bastards, like very obviously, like, Rhaenyra, girl, you couldn't choose the worst person to go have 3 kids with. Like, he looks nothing like any of y'all, okay? To choose to do that and to have it so public, and for her to be like so protected again by Viserys, protected every time Rhaenyra is able to do something that is wrong or irresponsible, that puts herself at risk, puts other people at risk, she is protected. And it makes sense why Alicent would be so upset that someone who is so irresponsible and privileged gets to just put that in her face, while she has to bury all of the trauma that she's experienced and the abuse that she's experienced and the victimization she's experienced as just a woman's duty. And Rhaenyra in those moments is like taking a knife and stabbing the like barrier of patriarchy that Alicent has been forced under and lived and conditioned under since she was a child. Why are we acting like someone who was in the 1200 medieval times, like expecting them to be so rebellious and so like almost feminist, when they see someone doing the complete opposite of that, when they see someone who is living out things that are not possible? Like, why are y'all expecting Alicent to just be warm and welcoming to Rhaenyra, just like shitting on everything? It's too much of an expectation on her. So I don't necessarily think it's hypocritical for her to be having sex with Sir Criston Cole, because that old man is dead. That crypt keeper is for real in the crypt now, okay? I will say it is interesting for Sir Criston Cole and his point of view, but we'll get to him. He's with the others. We don't care about him, okay? Another thing with Alicent is this episode affirms the fact that, like I said, Alicent does not have power in her own right. And as a woman, we see in the system that power comes from your connection to a man, being born from a king, being a princess, being the wife of the king, being the mother of a king. But you do not have power in your own rights, especially on Team Green. So with the fact that the Green Council was already planning to usurp Rhaenyra's throne and give it to Aegon without even informing Alicent, and then the fact that in this one, Alicent is writing letters to Rhaenyra, hopefully wanting Rhaenyra to bend the knee, even though that's not going to happen. She is like feeling or thinking that Otto was still her ally, which is very interesting to me, because him and her seem to have more of a passive view of these things, at least in her mind. She realizes that her sons are very dangerous, have a lot of power, have literal dragons, which is like having a nuke essentially. And she is failing to like continue her grasp of influence. And even Aegon in one scene when he's with his friends, like he's acknowledging the fact that like his mother and his grandfather think that he's like can just be petted, that he can be controlled. And she says to Otto that she's like, once Aegon gets bored of the idea of rule, at least in their mind, that's going to happen. And knowing that like this is your son and you love your son, but your son's also a terrible person, and you know that you're not going to be able to control him as much, is such an area of conflict that I think we're going to see Alicent deal with as we go on. So when it comes to Aemond, she's mad at Aemond. He says that she's mad. She says that he's mad. Her and Aemond have this very close bond because of the whole ice situation and him protecting her and her wanting to protect him. So for him now to do something, even though it's depicted almost like an accident, but it's like, you don't play chase with a dragon, especially not Vhagar, who probably has like dragon dementia and thinks that she's burning castles in Dorne, okay? She probably blames him because she knows that something's probably going to happen to them. So I'm curious that in the next episode, when they're dealing with what happens with Blood and Cheese, which we'll get to, if there is blame placed on Aemon because of that. So she just thinks that he's like angry, but I think Alicent is low-key scared of her own sons. I think she's scared of them. Not that they would do anything to her, but just of the potential for violence or their proclivity to choose violence first. Especially with Alicent, who doesn't seem, I want to say pacifist, but she's a deeply religious person. And I think that also plays a part into how she's viewing how they should proceed with the war. Lastly, I loved the scene of her lighting the candles, and her lighting the candles for her mother and her husband, and also Lucerys Velaryon, because she does feel bad that he died, and she almost had some hesitancy about burning the candle, but she does it anyway because she understands. The candle lighting scene was also intercut with Luke's funeral, and I think this is a great way to transition into talking about Rhaenyra. A lot of people criticize the fact that Rhaenyra is barely in this episode, and that's kind of the point. And Rhaenys even really says it, that when she finds out that her daughter Laena died, that she just continued to exist. She wasn't really there. And that's exactly what we see Rhaenyra doing. For majority of her scenes, we see her searching for Luke. I don't think that she was in denial that he was dead, but I think it's the fact that like she did not have any confirmation that it was, that didn't allow her to fully process and grieve. So she was showing up as a mother, not as a queen. And I think the fact that like Daemon was so annoyed by that and just wants to continue doing like war things and neglects the fact that her child died, her child was murdered, and that was very shortly after, and just thinks that, oh, well, she's neglecting her duties. He never cared about any of her kids. I do not think that Daemon cared any bit about Rhaenyra's 3 older children. I don't think they have a good relationship. I don't think he's like a great stepdad. He's shit. Rhaenyra just coming in and saying she wants Aemon Targaryen makes a lot of sense, and I will see Rhaenyra come out of the grief. I think that this season will not only be a conflict with her in the Greens, but also an inner conflict, because coming from season 1, Rhaenyra needed so much confirmation and validation from Viserys that he was right to choose her as heir, even as a grown woman. And the fact that she has a husband who choked her because she did not want to just go full force in it. Someone who is visibly there undermining her, who is physically assaulting her, who I think that it'll be interesting to see how she's going to resolve the inner conflict of lack of confidence in herself with also her husband who's undermining her and acting as if he is king and not just a consort, and also the larger thing. That'll be super interesting to see. So moving on to everyone else. Because Rhaenyra says, I want Aemon Targaryen, Daemon goes into the Red Keep and hires this rat catcher and hires this guard to take Aemon Targaryen and deliver them ahead. I know a lot of people are saying that it's not Aemon's fault for Blood and Cheese, but it 100% is. Hiring 2 people like that to go into the Red Keep, to go into the castle and to kill someone and then act like it's not his fault when the wrong person gets killed, it's very stupid. He did not give them very clear instructions of like, if you can't find him, what happens? They even asked them and they cut to black. So it's like, it's unclear whether or not he just said, bring me ahead, or if he said leave or whatever, because when they're in there, they just said, we need to leave her with a head. A head is a head. And that's why they choose to do that. Like they need to leave with the son, the head of a son. The fact that he would even do that when Rhaenyra never said anything. She didn't give a clear, oh, you need to go and kill someone. I need someone to go in there and get him. How does he know that the next day she wasn't going to wake up and be like, okay, this is how we should get Aemon? That's like the dumb thing. That is the dumb thing that I don't think, like, he is acting extremely recklessly because he thinks that he has power in his own right. He does not believe that the power he has comes from Rhaenyra. And even though he's like, oh, he's trying to be a good husband, you're very dumb. She never said that. And in the preview, it's like, you're lowering my claim to the throne by acts like this. And I don't think that he's really going to take accountability for it. So when it comes to Blood and Cheese, I made a couple TikToks about that, but my overall thoughts is that I thought it was executed well. I don't see how it would be possible for them to do it book accurate, considering the fact that those are very young child actors, and I think that it would be honestly unethical and like traumatizing for them to have it be so gory. I think the depiction of Helena in the show as someone who's very introverted, very withdrawn, very in herself, and how in shock she was and quiet. And to some people, it's like, why didn't she have this huge reaction? Why didn't do that? Because she's in shock, because she's extremely traumatized, because she just tends to like retreat within herself. So for all of these things to happen right in front of her, I think she also had the understanding of like, there's absolutely nothing I can do to save my son. There's nothing I can do. And the fact that she pointed in the books, she has 3 children, twins, and then a younger son who's like a baby. And when she's forced to choose, she chooses the baby, but they kill the older boy. And she chose the son Malor because the idea that he wouldn't really remember this. Okay. But in this, I think she just has the twins, Jaehaera and Jaehaerys, and she chooses Jaehaerys, and like, she's being truthful, she's being honest. I think maybe if she thought that if she chose the girl trying to deceive them, they would just kill both of them. So it would be better just to be honest. And then she just looks so devastated and in shock and just decides, okay, let me just pick up my daughter and go to my mom's room. And then she walks into Allison and Kristen having sex, and then she just sits on the floor and she's like, they killed the boy. Her saying the boy to me was significant because not using his name and like the depersonalization there, because it's so hard to process everything that just happened and how traumatized she seems. There was a part in the trailer for the next episode that people think that it's like, oh, Helena's going to take revenge. I don't know. I think that Helena saying, and now you know what you must do, I low-key feel like she's talking to herself about wanting to jump. You know what I mean? I think she's talking to herself about convincing herself to, you know, if you know the fate of her in the books, that she's wanting to jump. That's what I think it is. I don't think it's going to be, that just doesn't really seem to be in her characterization. She doesn't really seem involved in this war making, like none of it. And also the fact that she picked correctly. She was thinking, I'm afraid of the rats, and the person that came in was a rat catcher, and Blood and Cheese and like all that stuff, like probably going to blame herself from knowing all about this and being powerless. And I'm curious to see if other people blame her for not sacrificing her daughter, and things like that. So we'll just move on to Aegon. I don't hate Aegon. I think Rhaenyra and Aegon are more similar than people like to admit. He was very funny. I did laugh at some of his lines. Obviously, I'm not Team Green, but there wasn't really much for him to say on this. Oh, him including Jaehaera in the meeting, even though Jaehaera's like this little boy, was funny to me because he's like messing with Thailand and he's like, you want him to give you a pony ride. But side note, notice how he included his very young son in the meeting with the idea of like, oh, well, he's the heir, he has to know, versus Viserys, who, while Rhaenyra was in the meeting, she was a cupbearer. She was in service to all of the men. And this way, he has his son have a seat directly adjacent to him, like at the opposite head of the table, kind of like an equal, which is something that Viserys never did until Rhaenyra was much older. When it comes to Kristen and his version of duty, very skewed. I'd have to think about it a lot more depending on this one episode, because fiercely loyal to Alicent, because I think he thinks Alicent sees the true value in him, and they're very similar and codependent in the ways that Larys preys on Alicent's, like he manipulates her. She, in a way, also does that to Kristen, or that she plays on the part of him that cares so much about duty and honor. Maybe not manipulates. And so in this, I think that he's probably fine with it because he finally gets to see Alicent in that way. I'm gonna have to see more, because I think the reason he was upset at Rhaenyra is because Rhaenyra just discarded him. I think the fact that him and Alicent have a relationship, that he was basically like a pseudo father to her kids because Viserys was such a dick and also slowly dying. And that relationship makes him having sex with her different in his own mind, despite their, you know, prioritization of duty and honor. And yes, like some of it isn't just duty and honor and their own religious beliefs. Some of it is also in the presentation of those things is also important to keep up rather than the actual doing of it. Okay, and then Laris still a creep. One thing I'll say, which also relates to Allison, is the fact that Laris was able to remove Allison's ladies. The fact that the Dowager Queen does not really have a choice in her own ladies, and he was able to remove them and pick the women who bathe her and clothe her and braid her hair and wake her up and get all those things. Like those are very intimate things, okay? He's able to have a choice in that and pick that stuff, but she's not, is very scary. It's like he wants her to be able to be available to him to do all those weird foot things and have people who are not going to say anything. After all my thoughts, I probably missed something. But those are all my thoughts for so far for season 2, episode 1. Next episode, I'm very excited. And I think we're going to be going to Harrenhal soon. Either next episode or episode 3. But those are my thoughts. Please. Okay, season 2, episode 2. Part of the video is supposed to be 2 videos. It's supposed to be 2 separate videos. It's going to be 1 video. We're not going to do 2 again. I have my notes. Oh, so we left off with Blood and Cheese. This episode, I feel like, starts off really well because it has such a somber instrumental and tone, and it looks so dark. And I think that really transitions into this because it's occurring immediately after what happened. Both sides have to grapple with what just happened and the reactions to it, and more importantly, how that affects and or escalates or does not escalate the war. And we see the battle of the brothers Eric and Eric in this, and just in general, whether or not people proceed. There's like tension on both sides, whether or not to proceed with caution or to just go in with full force. And I really love the fact that you see accelerationist and then people are more so cautionary behind the scenes. And then again, you also see this crumbling of relationships and the cracks in relationships, both romantic and familial. In the Greens' case, a familial relationship between the generations and how they're coping with this grief. And then on the Black side, the relationship dynamic and almost power struggle between Rhaenyra and Daemon. I love the fact that the first scene of Rhaenyra we have is her hearing word of Blood and Cheese and her immediate confusion because she obviously did not order that. And she's like, it is 100% a lie for them to say that I did this. And everyone else at the round table obviously looking at Daemon like, we know it was him. And then I find it very interesting that she then takes Daemon aside and has a private conversation with him, because I think the fact that he did that in her name, essentially, without her permission, and the fact that she's getting questioned about it by her counsel, and they're like, we can understand the grief of a mother. And she's like, why would I do that to anyone when I'm grieving, and do it to Helena, of all people, an innocent? Like, she is now being questioned. Her authority is being questioned within her own counsel, and everyone knows it. And now behind the scenes, she has to confront Daemon, because if she were to do it in the council, it would reveal what everyone already knows. I just loved that the end of Daemira as a ship is upon us, and I'm so happy. Thank you to Sarah Hash, she's one of the writers, for this. I think Rhaenyra is now old enough to realize, and she's in much more responsibility to realize, that Daemon is power hungry and is not really in love with her, but is in love with how closer she brings him to the throne, which he wants. And while he's admitting that I just do everything for you, I'm here for you, I don't think he's able to separate what he views as Rhaenyra's needs and wants as his own, because I think he just sees it as his own. I don't think he realizes that Rhaenyra is his own person. And it's very sad watching it, because it reminds me of when Rhaenyra was in season 1, episode 8, where she's like asking her father if he thinks that making her heir was the right choice. And now again, she's asking another man in her life if he really sees her as queen. So it shows, like, again, that lack of inner confidence and inner, I don't know, confidence, but just like a surety that the men in her life are not assuring her that this is right. And in some ways, in this way, very obviously conflicting with that. Her calling him pathetic, her, like, everyone knew, like, calling out the fact that, like, you didn't give clear instructions, and if you did, your alternative to them not finding Amond was, oh, spill Hightower blood, which they did. Like, it's so unclear if he realizes that no matter what he does, it will not be his responsibility. It will always be like the consequences will always fall on Rhaenyra and her claim to the throne and all of those things. And I don't want to give him this like benefit of the doubt. I mean, this is like a grown ass man, so like I think that he should know that. I just don't think he cares. I think he's very inconsiderate when it comes to fully realizing what this is besides battle. He's not realizing that being queen or being the monarch is more than just willful crushing them. And Rhaenyra bringing up her father Viserys and realizing that, like, yeah, he made me heir to protect the realm from you, and her bring up, especially as a child, she's seeing this relationship as like a challenge, like her own version of a conquest. But I think she's realizing now that, like, I was a child and you were an adult, and she's realizing the power dynamics of this relationship and the full consequences of being in a relationship with someone that your father literally made you heir to protect you against. All Daemon does is weaken her claim to the throne, because by her marrying him, it's like, okay, so we made you heir so that he wouldn't be near it, and now you're married to him, so he would be your consort. And while in theory he wouldn't have power, he's going to use her position to have his own power. So I'm very happy the fact that she like sends him away. Also, I think it also shows that like Rhaenyra is still like scared of Daemon after he choked her in the last episode, and she brings up the fact that like I was giving birth and you weren't there for me. You choked me. And when he gets up and throws things on the floor and she like scurries back, she looks so afraid of him. And I think in the fandom especially, there's like this refusal to accept the fact that Daemon's not a good person. He's not a good person to Rhaenyra. There's no romanticization of that relationship. I've honestly, when it comes to Daemon, I don't know why people stand him so much. This idea in so much of the fandom that he's this like dutiful knight, and that because he's Team Black, he's therefore a good person, but he commits all of the same like sins or just like harmfulness to women and to other people in this fandom as every other man on like Team Green. He is also a rapist. He killed his first wife. Lena, his second wife, was like a teenager and he was a grown man. He groomed Rhaenyra. He choked Rhaenyra. He, like, all of these terrible things that he's done to women. In that scene where Bela is talking to Jace, which I really did like that conversation on fathers and how much Jace remembers of Laenor, and then also her bringing up, what about Sir Harwin Strong? She's like, sometimes I think that I hate him, and she's referring to Daemon, and it's like, yeah, he fucked Rhaenyra the same day as his second wife's funeral while he was laughing during her service, and then married Rhaenyra the day after that. Like, it's so obvious that he just views women as just like stepping stones to like whatever. He does not have this like respect within his own family. Like, they do not view him as this gallant knight. So many of them, like when Rhaenys and Corlys are having that conversation, they are very much so aware that he has his own agenda to some degree. And they fear that Rhaenyra is going to have like 2 battles. It's going to be very exciting to still see that Rhaenyra continues to grapple with the reality of her relationship, which is one that was predatory and probably not beneficial to her, and also parallel to Alicent realizing how much her power came from her husband who is now dead, and the extent of power of which she has influence over her sons. Let's get into Alicent. I think Alicent's scenes exemplify 2 things, which is her relationship with her family and then her relationship with the idea of like sin and duty and internal honor. So beginning with the relationship with her family, Alicent's really the only one to bring up the fact that Helena is extremely traumatized by this, to verbally consider Helena's pain in any way. But it's interesting that after Otto mentions that they should do this like procession, funeral procession for Jaehaerys, she like convinces Aegon of it, but then it's like, I don't want to be part of the spectacle, but then it goes along with it. And it's interesting that the Greens have the women of the family proceed in this procession. I guess it's to appeal to the like motherly aspect, and maybe if Aegon was there, he would have seemed weaker. They're still not really saying Jaehaerys' name. They just keep calling him the child or the boy or my son, etc. And then when she goes to Helena and she's like, Alicent has this conversation of like, it's duty, it's sacrifice, and they have to be representations of the crown. And when she says, when a thing like this happens, but you have to think about it, it's like, a thing like this has never happened. They don't have to do this. This is very obviously part of the propaganda. And Allison, I think, has this false sense that like sacrificing, it's going to lead to a reward. It's all necessary. It's all for a bigger reason. And she again is like internalizing the just put aside your own pain thing that's been ingrained in her from Otto. When she's there talking to Helena and she's like, they feel our pain. It's like they don't know you. They don't necessarily feel your pain. Okay. And Helena's like, I don't want them closer, because you have to think of it from Helena's point of view is two random small folk men came into her bedchambers, brutalized her son in front of her. She had to escape with her daughter into her mother's room. And now she's being forced into like sensory hell where she's to ride in a carriage behind her child's body, seeing his head sewn onto his body again. And while all these people scream, it's overwhelming. They're all around her and they're like talking about it's like, Rhaenyra's gonna pay, and like they have people, on top of the council screaming propaganda, telling the small folk that it was Rhaenyra, and there's like petals and the wind, and it's like way too much. She's getting overwhelmed, and Allison is doing her best to like comfort her. Allison was having that initial conversation with Otto. She questions like, we have no idea who did this. She does not want to believe that Rhaenyra did this because Rhaenyra didn't do this. Like she is the one person to cast doubt into it being Rhaenyra, and yet she's like blamed because when they're in the small council meeting with Aegon again, he's like, you wanted her to be spared. And it's like she has to, live in that with knowing that other people know that she has so much softness for Rhaenyra, and she's still of the idea that there can be like peace and stuff, and in a way partially being blamed for not going with the brutal approach, and this being seen as a consequence of that. I also find it like funny that like when Allison was like in the room, she was like, so anything that you saw, meaning her and Kristen Cole having sex, and Helena's like, this blanket is for my boy, and like completely cuts off the conversation of like, nobody realizes that. I genuinely, on the topic of that, don't think, and this is a good transition into what it's next topic of like duty, I 100% think Otto knows that Allison has been having sex with Kristen. I don't think he cares. She's with Kristen Cole again. It seems like she's waiting. She goes into the bath, she takes off her clothes, and he leaves and then stands outside of her door, and it's like she wants him to come inside, but he's not wanting to because he, similar to her, has this feeling that like they've dishonored themselves, they've like dirtied themselves, and this is a part of the punishment for that, and they have to face those consequences. And how Allison like reasons with her relationship to religion and the whole concept of like how her life is going, the trauma she's endured, and the things that will then happen to her children, her grandchildren, etc. as this war continues, will be interesting to watch. Now that we've gotten both to the main characters of it all, let's go talk into interesting stuff. Since we were last talking about Kristen Cole, the main event of this episode was the brother battle. It was very obvious that Kristen Cole, or Sir Kristen Cole, was projecting his own feeling of failure and dishonor onto Sir Eric. And it's interesting that we have that confrontation with Sir Eric, similar to the one we had last episode with Daemon and his twin brother, of blaming them of like, if you acted, then these things wouldn't happen. Last episode, it was Daemon like, well, if you just killed Aegon, then this wouldn't happen. But this one, it's like your brother is with Kristen. He's confronting him as like, your brother is like gone and sworn allegiance to Rhaenyra. How do we know that you're not in allegiance with him and then like you're like a spy, and stuff? So he tells him like, you should go and kill Rhaenyra, which is such a like, really? You really think it's going to be that? It's so easy. Just pull up because he looks exactly like his brother. It's like, you don't think that no one's going to notice that, hey, why are there two of the same person? Okay. But I love the fact that Eric was like, well, you're the person, the Kingsguard. Why don't you appoint a specific guardian to Helenda's rooms? Which really does answer some of the fandom questions. Once Otto hears of it, it was so funny. That scene with Otto where he confronts Aegon of the fact that like, are you dumb? Are you dumb? Like, for real? You really think that that's going to happen? Because what's most likely going to happen is that he's going to die. Eric is going to die trying to kill Rhaenyra. So I don't know why you even thought this would work. And Otto berating him and basically telling Aegon, like, we put you on the throne. I'm shocked that Aegon genuinely still believes that his father, like, last minute after 20 years said, oh yes, and I want it to be my boy. Even though at the dinner the night he died, he was like, Rhaenyra's gonna be a great queen. And then like last minute said, actually no. Shocked that he believed that. And with Otto just telling him like, you know what? Maybe this was a mistake. Maybe all of us like trying, like usurping the throne was a mistake because you're dumb. You're really stupid. And like you don't have any judgment and this is not going to be good for us. And for him, shocked that Aegon genuinely believes that it would be so easy to send someone just to kill Rhaenyra. It's like, if it was that easy, they would have done it before. It's clearly not that easy. Aegon's like, well, you know, I'm going to relieve you of your duty and you can leave. And he takes the hand of the king thing. Even Sir Criston Cole was shocked by that. And he throws it on the ground. I thought that was even better that he didn't even like hand it to him. Like he's just disgusted with this. So I wonder if this is going to be the last that we see of Otto. Probably not. I still think he's going to retain power within the Red Keep behind the scenes, even though he's not there. I like the fact that he talked to Allison, and Daeron, her fourth child, is not a figment of the fandom's imagination. He does exist in Old Town, even though we will not be seeing him. Okay, was it just me, or when Aemon was in the brothel and he was being like in fetal position, comforted by the woman who last season it was revealed that like she had sex with him since he was like 13, which is like very is it just me, or does she look like Alicent? Like she has the similar colored hair. She's an older woman. And when we saw her last season, Criston Cole was like, all women are in the figure of the mother, which is obviously a reference to the Faith of the Seven and like the mother figure there. But I do think it's kind of interesting that like he's almost talking about like he didn't really mean to kill Luke, and like feels bad for it, and I think is realizing the consequences of his actions, and more so how it has forever changed the relationship he has with his mother. And more so like realizing that it's interesting that he is seen as like a foe to his uncle Daemon, even though Daemon's been in war. And I was thinking about it, it's like Luke was the first person that Aemon really ever killed. Like if you think of it, like he probably was never in any war. Like there was no wars that was happening when he was a kid. He trained really well under Sir Criston Cole to be such a great fighter, and he obviously has the strength of Vhagar, the largest dragon, but that is the first person that he killed, and it was his own cousin, or no, nephew. Nephew, and it wasn't necessarily intentional. So it has such a different relationship that I think he's looking at himself like, people have this perception of me. Like, I think it's the start of this like villain arrow. It's like people have this perception of me of like a kinslayer and this like killer and fierce warrior. In reality, that's just not really true, because that's the first kill he's ever had. I do also, side note, it's so interesting that one character in the brothel who everyone's like, she's gonna be so important, and it turns out to just be some random person. She's never gonna be seen again apparently. But I wonder how soon it will be that Aemond and Daemon fight or meet each other at Harrenhal, or Aemond is in Harrenhal, because we know that's where Daemon's going. I think we'll probably see it season 3. I don't think we'll see it this season, any fight over the Godswood. Now on to the brothers fighting. I think it's interesting that like Nyceria being set to freedom, and it's kind of left unclear whether or not she left. I think she's still at Dragonstone, because I think she's the one that alerted that like, hey, he's not the guy, because she just saw him, and then when she was leaving he was coming on the beach. The brothers fight was done really well, and I like the fact that it's when Eric with an A was talking to Eric with an E, he was like, we're brothers, we've been born the same day. And he's like, well, you left us. And it's interesting to see that relationship as them choosing opposing sides, and Eric going with Rhaenyra is seen as a betrayal to Eric personally, as a brother and as a twin, not even as a king thing. It's like he feels betrayed that his brother is not with him, and not seeing Aegon as the rightful king. And so Lord Eric, with an E, choosing to take his own life and saying, forgive me, and then them being buried together, I think was so sad to watch, but really executed super well. Rhaenyra looked so scared. I was like, oh my God. Oh my God. Like, watching that battle was so insane, but really well. Oh, another thing I forgot to mention with Alicent. A lot of people consistently have this criticism of Alicent and her motherhood. When she shows affection to Aegon, it's how dare she support a rapist. When she doesn't, she's a terrible, abusive mother. And I don't think people can really see the nuances of Alicent being a victim herself, than a mother to such a terrible person, but also a terrible person who's in a position that he did not want, and also dealing with his own grief. Otto does not really comfort Alicent at all when she breaks down thinking about the trauma that Helena is in and the scars that this will have onto her. He doesn't comfort her. When she opens up to him about, like, I've sinned, he's like, I don't want to hear it. There's no ability for her to open up to anyone. So it's not shocking that when she walks into Aegon's room and sees him breaking down in private, which this is like the only time we've seen him be sad. The other times it was anger. It's very it's not shocking. Aegon is not the child that she's really close to ever since he was a teenager. Helena, I feel like as her daughter, has a special place in her heart. And when it comes to her kids, Aemond was the boy that, like, I think she felt closer to because she felt very sympathetic that he didn't have a dragon, and that because he lost an eye. So to see this, and also she's the one that he can depend on and trust. That's why she goes to him in episode 9 of season 1. And I think that him killing Lucas changed that, and that's why he has to receive comfort elsewhere. So it's not shocking that she really doesn't know what to do. And then her getting back with Kristen Cole, I think that's always going to be a battle of will they, won't they, and like power and stuff, like desire, and also this pretendness of duty, because sometimes it's not real. Like, they force themselves into the cages of duty and stuff like that. Okay, one thing I will say, I thought that the peasant revolt was going to happen this episode. Like, you see it in the trailer with Alicent and Helena running away. I thought it was going to happen this episode because the costumes look very similar, but apparently Alicent's dress is different. So to move on to predictions, I think that'll probably happen in episode 3, because in this episode, Aegon killed all of the rat catchers because he couldn't figure out which one was which, because he killed Blood before he could really answer the question of which rat catcher. And that's also why Otto was upset at him. So I think that because you see the people there and they're upset because those are, like Otto said, brothers and sons and fathers. And when you see that what happened, they're like, what they get for being at His Majesty's service. It's like you're showing to the people that you're fine killing them all. You don't really value any of their lives. And I think that maybe next episode that'll happen or so. I do think that Rhaenyra and Alicent are going to meet. People have shown like close-ups of hands, and it seems like Rhaenyra is going to dress up like a septa and meet her at the table with the candles and stuff. Oh, another thing I find interesting is that Aegon is like, my son is my heir and my legacy, and I will be very interested for the next episodes to be to see who is going to be seen as his heir, whether or not they're going to like force Helena to have Maelor, like they're gonna have to create him or conceive him to have another son, or if they're just gonna skip Jaehaera, because if they say Jaehaera can be the heir, then that kind of puts them in a precarious situation. It's not necessarily directly. I see a lot of people like, oh, that would completely defeat their point. I'm like, not really, because Jaehaera would be their only child and only choice. Viserys went on to have 4 sons or 3 sons after having Rhaenyra, so it does kind of make it different. But Rhaenyra was his only daughter at the time, so I can see those things like, is Aemon going to be the heir or not, and where those things go. But another thing is, like, you don't see Jaehaera at all in this episode. That little girl is not there at all, and I don't really know, like, she's not even in the background, anything. And I think it shows how like little considered women are, and like the female members of the family are, in importance to the family and continuing the family and being part of the family, because saying that your son is your legacy and not just your children, period, it is very you know, diminishing and minimizing of them at all. Like they're just seen as pawn pieces to be married and have kids and have alliances and nothing else. They're not really important as their own individuals. So I think that concludes all of my predictions, thoughts, and everything when it comes to Alice and Rhaenyra for season 2, episode 2 of House of the Dragon. Thank you for watching. Next week, I'll probably just do episode by episode. I only did this because I just didn't have time to film in between that. But thank you all for watching. Please give me a like and subscribe, and I'll see you next Friday.